Welcome everyone. Those stories shortly, but first some breaking news just coming into the WION newsroom. China has now issued a veiled threat to India. The Chinese spokesperson says that in response to a query, said that there will be utter chaos if China entered India. Again, breaking news just coming in. China provokes India on the issue. A quick recap of the latest information from the Chinese spokesperson Hua Chunying. In a response to a query, says that there will be utter chaos if China enters India. Let's get perspective on this story. Let's head straight to the WION newsroom, joined by our senior editor, Surya Gangadharan. Surya, how grave is this threat from China?
Well, this is not a threat. They're basically restating their own position on the Doklam Plateau. But frankly, this is actually a misrepresentation of facts because the Doklam Plateau is disputed between China and Bhutan. This is the reason why Bhutan invited India in when it saw China was building a road through the Doklam Plateau. And there is an understanding between the two sides that no move will be made by either side to change the status quo on the ground. Now, when China moves to build a road there, obviously the status quo is being changed, which is why the Bhutanese tried to stop them and failed. Then they requested India to move in. So that's where the issue actually is, and these Chinese statements are only intended to confuse the issue.
The issue certainly has dragged on now for several weeks, in fact, now, Surya. Perhaps where do we expect India's stance or response on this coming, given the latest information?
No, I think India has been pretty circumspect in not having to respond to every Chinese statement. If you've noticed, our foreign ministry has been very measured in what it says. They react only when required, and they don't see a need to react to every statement that is emanating from China's foreign ministry. The Chinese are in a bit of a bind because they've gone over the top when it comes to reacting to the manner in which India has, kind of stopped their activities on the Doklam Plateau. So what do they do now to get around India? So they're using a combination of perhaps psychological pressure, building up statements from the foreign ministry. We earlier also had some remarks coming from their defense ministry. We've seen their media on a fairly hostile note against India. So it's a combination of various factors, various methods that the Chinese are using to try and get India to withdraw its troops from the Doklam Plateau. Of course, that isn't going to happen. We're now over 2 months into our standoff now.
All right, we'll come back to you in just a second, Surya. Let's actually listen into a part of that statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
地区是毫无争议的中国领土，印方以所谓的关切中方修路为借口非法越界，理由荒谬，性质恶劣，事实清楚。解决此事的唯一基础和前提是印方立即无条件地撤回所有非法越界的人员和设备。我想请大家可以试想一下，如果姑息和纵容印方的这一荒谬的逻辑，那么是不是如果谁看不惯邻居家里的活动，都可以随意地闯进邻居家里赖着不走呢？如果循着印方的这一逻辑，是不是中方觉得印度在边境地区大兴土木、大搞基建，威胁了中方的安全，我们就可以堂堂正正地进入到印度的境内去进行出手阻止呢？这样岂不是天下大乱？还有什么国际关系准则可言？中方迄今保持着高度的克制，我们可以做到仁至义尽，但是我们希望印方呢能够拿出一个大国应有的负责任、守法律、讲道理的态度，做出理性和明智的判断和决策。
Let's go back to Surya Gangadharan standing by in the newsroom to get reaction. Surya, what about the other neighbors in South Asia, Bhutan, Nepal, in terms of what has happened with the Doklam standoff? Where exactly do you read their position as India and China continue to be at loggerheads?
Well, you've seen how circumspect our neighbors have been with regard to commenting on the standoff. Now, Bhutan has made its position clear. The Bhutanese foreign ministry, we've seen their reactions on their own website, where they say that the area is disputed and China has tried to alter the status quo. So their position stands, and we are aware of certain comments that the Bhutanese have made during the summit in Kathmandu a few weeks ago. But aside from that, none of our other neighbors have seen it fit to get into this controversy because many of them are beholden to China. If you look at Sri Lanka, for example, it is indebted to China to the tune of billions of dollars. and they have no wish to get into a situation where they are criticizing China because frankly they can't afford to. Nepal has been again careful not to say anything because they are getting, they're hoping to get a lot of funds for infrastructure development from China, and for that reason they would prefer not to say anything. They also don't want to annoy India because, as you're aware, Prime Minister Dioba is going to be in Delhi tomorrow on a 5-day visit, and they're looking forward to various development projects from India. So it suits them to stay neutral.
All right, Surya Gangadhran getting us the very latest on the India-China standoff. Surya, thank you for those updates. For more developing news coming in on the India-China standoff, China is issuing a threat to India. The Chinese spokesperson Hua Chunying, in response to a query, said there will be utter chaos if China did enter India. Let's get Einar Tangen joining us now, a political commentator from Beijing, to get the very latest on this. Einar, thanks for joining us. How is this being played out there in the Chinese media when it comes to the Doklam standoff?
The Doklam standoff has been fairly consistent. China's stance has been that Indian troops entered into a disputed area, which they claim is theirs, and Bhutan claims is theirs, but does not involve India. India sees this as a strategic issue because of the road building. It has not been settled. I'm afraid that it's become a kind of a logjam. I think both sides, though, seem to be wanting a peaceful resolution, and I think that is the best way to handle this. The remarks today by Donald Trump, I think, were an indication that he's seeking an opportunity, once again, to use India as a doorstop to China, and he's playing the Pakistan card. But keep in mind, he mentioned that it comes with a price.
Right.
He's one of the few presidents who openly say that he is, India is making hundreds of millions and therefore, quote, you owe us something. Not quote, I said by inference. So I think people should keep a cool head and see exactly where the economic interests lie before making any quick decisions.
Einar, let me also ask you, a follow-up on this. When it comes to some of the other nearby countries, I mean, Nepal, certainly, Dioba making his visit to India shortly this week. Nepal, Bhutan, some of the other South Asian neighbors, are you surprised by perhaps the lack of taking sides, really remaining neutral when it comes to the Doklam standoff?
Well, I think people see this as an issue between the two great Asian powers, and they don't want to get involved one way or other because India, no one wants to, in essence, make India an enemy by jumping on China's side and vice versa. So I think this is a situation where it's not going to be settled internationally. Borders do not go away. So China and India need to sit down and figure out what the next step is and how to resolve this. The code of conduct, whether you open up the Belt and Road Initiative, the nuclear supply group, these are all issues that are on the table and therefore can be discussed.
Absolutely. We're going to come back to you in just a second, Einar. We'll have you hold on. Let me also bring in our senior foreign editor, Padma Rao, joining us now from the WION newsroom. Padma, thanks for joining us. The standoff continues to, go on for weeks now. We see China coming back, trying to take a jab at India. I mean, where does this road, no pun intended, where do we think this will end?
Well, Archit, from what analysts on this side of the fence are saying, India is more than well prepared to deal with any contingencies, and it's not as if India is sitting back like it has done on previous occasions in the last 70 years of our history. So there is preparation on both diplomatically as well as in actual terms on the front along the 3,700-kilometer long China border. So it's not restricted to Doklam alone. I think there is an understanding and also a vast experience that the Chinese tend to have these incursions, make these incursions anywhere they pretty much like along that long border. Having said that, I see this escalation of the war of words also closely related to the forthcoming BRICS summit that is due to take place in China. And as you know, India is, of course, one of the most important partners in this constellation. And there isn't any clear word from the Prime Minister's office in India as yet as to whether Prime Minister Modi will be attending or not. Don't forget he boycotted the Obo summit because, you know, Obo, a part of it goes through Indian territory, that is Kashmir, which is occupied by Pakistan. It's China's close ally. So it remains to be seen which way Prime Minister Modi is going to decide about the BRICS summit. And I think some of this rhetoric coming out of China also has a lot to do with the silence from the PMO in New Delhi over whether Prime Minister is going to attend or not. Because if he does not, then it goes without saying that, you know, if the summit is held, it's going to be a lame duck summit, or it's likely not to be held at all.
Padma, you know, this is one of the longest standoffs that's taken place since back in, I think, 1987, more than 30 years ago in Arunachal Pradesh. I mean, certainly India trying to protect its borders and really perhaps standing up given its issues with some of the other nearby South Asian countries. How important do you think it is for India at this point to continue this? I mean, where do we see this sort of manifesting in itself, given this recent comment coming in from China?
Well, for any Indian who's seen the previous standoffs with China, we have more or less always been on the back foot. But, you know, I think China has to realize, and the world has to realize, that India is on a totally different, I mean, this is this is a whole new ball game altogether. We're talking 60 years on, we're talking about an entirely new, Indian Armed Force, more determined. We're talking about a new administration, which has a new foreign policy. It's dealing on, various levels to international levels to address this problem of repeated Chinese incursions along its borders. So this is a multi-pronged exercise, and of course nobody wants a war. I mean, that goes without saying. Nobody here is gung-ho or war hungry or is sort of saber rattling, as the cliche goes.
Right.
But at least I think that the firm message that is going out is that India is no longer going to be bullied or pushed back just because China flexes its muscle.
Absolutely. Let me bring Einar Tengen back into the conversation. Einar, how do you respond to that? The fact that perhaps India taking a tougher stance, a stronger stance, unwilling to let it go when it comes to this Doklam standoff. One of the first times India and China, they've had issues before, but the first time since 1987. About 30 years ago. I mean, what do you make of this in terms of India's, India's stance on this issue?
Well, quite frankly, it's hard to understand. I always put it in these terms. Reverse the situation. If Chinese troops entered into a disputed area like Kashmir on behalf of Pakistan's side because they said that India was building a road there, what would be the reaction from India? I think there would be absolute outrage, and they would be saying that you're taking sides and that this is not part of your business, that this is not a Chinese concern. Now, obviously, India feels very strongly that Bhutan needs its protection. But the question is, does Bhutan feel that way? There's been a very, very quiet side, and also, in addition to being quiet, there have been a few voices that have said, look, we don't want to be a ragdoll between these two great powers. We're not a country, Bhutan, that can afford to get involved in trade wars or actual wars. We're not equipped that way. They would like to see a peaceful resolution. Their original proposal to trade Doklam for some larger areas to the north was vetoed, in essence, by India. So India has to reflect a little bit on its own actions and determine whether or not they are acting defensively or aggressively, and how that can be seen by others, not simply by standing in your own shoes and trying to look at how you feel about it. What is the rational course?
All right, let me bring in Padma Rao. I understand, Padma, you also want to chime in under the conversation.
Yeah, I think Ainar's question is more of a hypothetical question. What would India do if China were to? I mean, the fact is, Einar, that on the ground it has happened repeatedly, incursions by Chinese troops, not only in Doklam. And you may argue, and I will come to your argument shortly about Doklam being disputed territory between Bhutan and China. But the fact, and also the statements you made about, what you claim the Bhutanese say that they want a peaceful resolution. Of course, certainly everyone, any neighboring country wedged between these two big powers would want a peaceful resolution. Having said that, I am not aware of a single statement that has emanated from Thimphu since the very first one they made, regarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bhutan in Doklam. Since then, we've not actually had a statement from Bhutan which says all the things that you just narrated. So I think we'll have to wait and watch to see. And also, very importantly, Bhutan has also not refuted its invitation, or rather its request to India to come in and police that bit of territory, be it disputed or not. So once we hear those things from Thimphu, then we can talk. But right now, I think most of this is speculation, primarily emanating from the Chinese media. I remember about 10 days ago, there was a statement from Beijing, which indicated that the Bhutanese had told the Chinese, told Beijing that they were actually, this was part of China's territory. Now, this must have been a Chinese whisper. Nobody ever heard that. There has not been an official statement to that effect. The only official statement so far that has come to light has been the very first one, in which Bhutan maintains its sovereignty over that piece of territory.
And Einar, let me bring you back into the conversation in terms of how this is being played out there. How is the Chinese media responding to this standoff with Doklam now, entering its second month?
Within the mainstream media, there's a certain amount of frustration. Within social media, there's also some. But I think it would be a mistake to think that the official Chinese position is done by, tabloid newspapers that are trying to invoke kind of nationalist sentiments.
Right.
You have to listen directly to the Chinese government. You have to, and same in India. There has been a lot of chat, a lot of questions. I'm asked, why is China warmongering? I mean, the question, in essence, assumes the answer. I think people need to be more clear. I think shows like this, where you're talking about the issues, are very important, rather than being emotional about them.
All right, let's bring in Atul Aneja, a correspondent for The Hindu, joining us in Beijing as well. Atul, great to have you on. The standoff continues, China exchanging words with India. It seems like it just goes back and forth, back and forth. How surprised are you, and what do you think needs to happen for this sort of to de-escalate?
I'm not sure I heard you clearly, but are you talking about the statement from the foreign ministry
today?
Correct.
Yes, the latest statement the Chinese foreign ministry just made. What do you make of that?
Okay. Well, it doesn't basically change the script, this particular statement, because the Chinese position has been consistent, both from the foreign ministry and from the defense ministry, that Indian troops have to withdraw, and that's the precondition for any dialogue. Now, this is an escalation in terms of rhetoric of the same position, but it's getting a little sharper now, in the sense that it is talking about possible repercussions internally in India. But I don't see it as a fundamental change to the position which the Chinese over the last 2 months.
Right. I think we might be losing connection there, Atul. We'll try to get back to you in just a moment. Let me bring in Einar there back into the conversation. Einar, continue in terms of, you were talking about the media, the social media, perhaps the nature there of how things are perhaps a little bit more controlled, perhaps a stark contrast to how things are here in India, in terms of how the message is really getting out there to the people. Einar, go ahead. All right, unfortunately, we have lost our connection with Einar. Really quickly, closing comments from Padma Rao joining us in the newsroom. Padma, let's sort of wrap all of this up. And this whole back and forth with the standoff, where do we hope to see this coming to an end?
Well, obviously, the thing that is desirable would be talks, negotiations, and also clarity, I think, is required, specifically a position taken by Bhutan, because this is not about, the India-China border, technically speaking. It's about the tri-junction, really, and it's about a piece of land that belongs to Bhutan. So there has to be a call, there has to be a position taken anew by the Bhutanese government, and that has not happened so far. Understandably so, because as Einar was saying, these are small countries wedged between two big nations. But of course, the right way to do it would be through diplomatic negotiation.
Absolutely.
But the wrong way to do it would be by backing off each time China shows aggression.
All right, we'll have to wait and see how all of this unfolds. Padma Rao getting us the latest. Padma, thank you for those updates.